Super quick introduction. Alrighty. So my name's Maya, and I finished at Hopkins. I graduated with my MHS and PhD from the mental health department in 2014. And I developed an interest for the use of data for storytelling, I think, at my time at Kaiser, which is where I've been for the past 7+ years. I've been working at Kaiser as the senior program manager, responsible for the community health needs assessment and then evaluation work in general. And I think I developed an interest for storytelling because we had a lot of data available to us at Kaiser, and we really needed to convince key stakeholders on how to use the data and shape the decisions that they made, presenting data to them in a way that was compelling and simple. So anyway, this is a space that I got into beyond my time at Hopkins. But before I jump into the content, I really hope that this can be as interactive as possible. So at any given time, please feel free to jump in with questions. I don't mind being interrupted. And also, I intersperse some more interactive elements in the presentation later on. And so I think the easiest way at this point will be to just answer the questions in the chat. But if you would like to just unmute yourself and jump in with a comment, yet again, I invite any and all interruption. So anyway, let's get going. Oops. So let me just move this out of the way. All right, so just very briefly, we're going to be talking about how to use data for storytelling. We're going to touch on very briefly the use of data for decision making. I'm going to be spending a little bit more time talking about data visualization and some tips for that. And then the last section is going to be focusing on how to bring your story to life. And in the last section, I actually want to show you some of the products that I've created, again, using my experience at Kaiser as a way to just illustrate some of the concepts we'll be discussing today. All righty, so here's the first attempt at getting you to engage in the chat. So when you think about the term data analysis, if you could just type up in the chat some of the things that you think about, that would be great. Just give you 1 minute for that. And Olivia, if you could just read out some of the comments, because I won't be able to see the screen while I'm sharing this. Okay, great. All right, well.
We have one that says easy to skew.
Okay, great. Do we have a couple more comments? And then
we do. Another that says math, another that says pictures of now, figures and symbols, and then concrete proof.
Okay, great. Well, if you were to ask me what I thought of data analysis, I definitely have flashbacks from my biostats course with John McGreedy. I have very fond memories. I don't know if he's still around and still teaching, but I sure hope he is, or I'll think about Stata. But what I wanted to say today is that I think to tell a good story using data, there are 3 key elements that we need to keep in mind. One is the data itself. We need to have meat to the story, so that's key. But I think any story would be incomplete if we didn't also have a narrative that accompanies the data. And the other element is the visual. So again, just these 3 key elements that are a part to any data story. And so we want to be able to analyze the data and communicate the story in a way that is clear and compelling. That's really what I'm going to be referring to as data storytelling. If you ask me for a definition of data storytelling, it would be the ability to effectively communicate insights from a data set using narratives and visualizations. It can be used to put data insights into context for and inspire action from your audience. I think that that's critical. You need to have a clear purpose for why you want to be telling the story. And ultimately, it's to inform decision making, in particular, once you move outside of the the academic setting into the corporate world, which is where I'm sitting now. Really, the data that we learn from the coursework is you need to be able to communicate that in ways that shape decisions taken. Oops. So just in terms of thinking about the steps in a data story, there are 5 key elements. The first and most important, I think, is to understand the context, to set the stage, to understand why the data is relevant, what the story is, and what the ultimate goal of the data and the story is going to be about. We want to be able to package the data in a way that's effective. And I think the choice of the graph is going to be critically important. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that later on in the deck. So this is really to figure out how to package the information that later gets put into this data story. You want to eliminate clutter. We all, I think, have experience working with big data sets. I certainly have memories of cleaning large data sets during my time at Hopkins. And the purpose of the visualization is really to boil down the information to what's most relevant and poignant to tell a specific story. Visualizations are really key at focusing an attention to a specific element of the graph. And then the final product is really to be able to tell a coherent story to meet a particular goal. And that story should be tailored and adapted to the stakeholders that you're targeting. I guess I read a lot of bedtime stories to my girls these days, but I just wanted to take a minute here to take a step back and just think about the key elements of the story. This is in general elements of that need to be in any story, but also in a data story. So you need to be thinking about the characters. So those are the individuals that the story is about. They should be introduced with enough information that the audience can visualize each person. Every story should have a main character, and the main character really determines the way the plot develops and usually who will solve the problem the story centers on. The setting is really the location of the action. The environmental surroundings of the story should be communicated clearly with enough detail so that the audience can get a sense of the setting so they could visualize it. The story also has a conflict. This really is the why, for why the data is helping to inform a specific aspect of the story. The plot is centered on this conflict and the ways in which the characters attempt to resolve the problem. The solution to the problem is the way that the action is resolved. And it's important that the resolution fit the rest of the story in terms of tone. So I'm bringing this up today because I think that this is something to keep in mind in the back when you start thinking about telling a story with the data. I'm not talking about creating a fairy tale with your data, but I do think that these are important elements to keep in mind because you need to be able to talk about the target audience and explain the purpose of the story and what the problem is that you're trying to solve for. So what we have here is just a couple steps for how to use data for decision making. And I think that there are 6 key steps to effectively make decisions using data. The first is to identify objectives, and it's important to be as specific as possible to understand the purpose of the story. This will help you later in the process to choose key performance indicators and metrics that will help influence decision. The second step is to identify sources of data. To ensure success, you need to get inputs and talk to folks across the organization to understand short and long-term goals for why this data is important. These inputs help inform the question that people ask in their analyses and help you prioritize data sources. The third step is to collect the data that you need, making sure that it's of high quality and that you can trust and rely on the data so that you can build your story most effectively. You then want to explore the data, and I'll talk a little bit about how data visualizations can help you accomplish that. Then the developing insights is the element, is the step where you start synthesizing and distilling the information to be able to lead the audience to the conclusions that you would like them to draw from the data. and then share your insights with the story. So I know that this graph, the steps are presented in a linear fashion, but what I want to highlight here is that you can go back to steps. It's not that you have to go from step 1 to step 2. So at times you'll explore data and realize that you don't have enough data and have to go back to step 3 to get additional data to make sure that you have the data that you want. The other thing I want to say is that later on in the presentation, I'll be talking about specific examples from some of my work, and I hope that they'll help to bring some of this insight, this to life. And I promise that there's some interactive sessions coming up next, so we'll have a chance to engage. Data visualization, what is it? Really, the idea is to transform raw data into compelling visuals. Data, as we know, has become abundant and complex. But even though the data is complex, we want to make sure that we can simplify the visuals and clearly communicate information. What is key is to be able to communicate information in a way that is memorable to your audiences. So these are some common mistakes that people make in terms of the visualization. The wrong type is used. So sometimes you might choose a chart or graph that isn't suited to the insights you're trying to convey. So for example, a line graph will give you the impression that something is increasing or decreasing, but it's not always the best type of visualization to use if you're not charting over time. You might want to create a pie chart based on somebody to show how much work that person has, but what you really want to do is to see how many times they've been in a specific, how many times they have in a specific status. So sometimes you use a bar chart versus a pie chart. Anyway, it's important to understand when to use each. The second mistake that's commonly made is using too many variables. Data visualization is about telling a story. In the example here, you see that the graph is unreadable because you have too many variables. And I think I like to say that a maximum of 6 makes it readable for the audience. More than that gets a little bit tricky to decipher the information. I know the image is small here, but scaling is important. What you see here is misleading. So I know that it's small, but you have a 37% over here, the red line, and over here is 33 and 21. So the graph is making it look like that candidate is way ahead of the others, when in fact it's just a 4-point difference between the 33 and 34. And then the other thing to keep in mind are the color choices. So you'll see over here that it makes it really hard to read the graphs because of the color selection. All right, now it's time to hear from you. So what I'm going to be asking is if you could just type in the chat, if you could tell me what is it that you're learning from this graph? What's missing in your opinion? And if somebody could please read out some of the comments, because I can't see them in the shared screen mode, I apologize.
There's labeling, learning something is 76% missing context. There's also what are the variables. Someone else has put labeled as well. Someone else mentioned no context. Literally everything is missing besides the percentage. And then someone else has commented on, what the 76% is, because there's no description or title.
Okay, perfect. And that's exactly right. So here's a quote that I like that reminded me of this graph. Make everything as simple as possible, but not simpler. As you all stated in your comments, the context is missing and it makes it impossible to decipher this image. So here is, I think, a good guiding principle for how to lay out a graph. It's always important to have an observation, so the insight that the chart is hoping to generate. And I tend to like to put that at the very top of the graph. It just helps guide the audience to a specific conclusion. I also think it's really important to always include the chart title, and I tend to put that right below the observation. The title should have information about what, how, and when measurement happened. And lastly, the chart type. So the selection of the type of chart is really key here to be able to communicate the information most clearly. So this is, I think, just an easy guide for information that you want to absolutely make sure to include. It's also key to include the unit measurements if you are to have those presented, just to clearly state what you're measuring and why on the graph. All right, so here's another one of these interactive activities, and I'd like to know, when you think of this visual, what comes to mind? Please, again, take a couple minutes to react to this graph.
So some of the comments we have are which states, time frame. Someone else said with 18 states. Then there's darkest colors stand out the most. The claim at the top does not match the color coding of the key. And it says that the bins are pretty uneven, and also mentions the ranges.
Okay. Any other comment? Because there's a couple other things that I'd like to have folks comment on.
Is it a rate, question mark, or just a pure number of cases?
Yeah, well, that's also a great comment. And somebody touched on one of the key things that I wanted to bring up here, is that you have associations when you look at the colors. So when you see a dark color, you tend to think worse. And so when you look at this graph, first of all, you'll see that the legend is not ordered. It's not rank ordered, right? And you'll also see that the highest number here, 100,000, is this like yellowish. So that there's no logic in how the colors are organized. And this is actually a real graph. And the reason why I'm presenting this information over here is that I wanted to emphasize that representing color conventions is important. So I think that there's a tension between wanting to create original graphs while at the same time making sure that you still have graphs that folks can interpret really quickly. Just keep in mind how people absorb information these days. It just, people often just have split seconds to look at these graphs and come to their own conclusions. So the most straightforward these graphs can be, and the more they can respect conventions, the better off you'll be. So I just wanted to take a little more time to talk about the color conventions. So it really, again, following the conventions is critical to make sure that the information can be easily digested. I like this example of the red and green stop sign. So the green one obviously certainly stands out to me as something that feels off. So in the US and in many other countries, red, of course, is for bad. Green is better. But there is something that I wanted to mention, and that's is in particular, since I'm sure a number of you are engaged in international work, it's important to keep in the back of your mind that different cultures have different connotations. So color has cultural significance and can change meanings to people with different backgrounds. So in Western cultures, Black is typically used to referred to as for death, but in India, white has a similar connotation. So again, it's always important to consider who you're trying to create these graphs and images for. So just keep that in the back of your mind as you develop these graphs. All right, so this is one that I like, and it's a beautiful graph. I think it's very appealing aesthetically. But I'd like to hear from you again in the chat what you feel this graph is telling you. And this is a fun one. I don't want to, no, not going to tell you what it means quite just yet, but tell me what you think this graph is about. You can go crazy with your ideas because the answer is not going to be what you think it is. So you can have some fun here.
So some individuals are mentioning that it's hard for them to read or to interpret the graph because it is small.
Okay.
Someone did say the occurrence of an event over a period of time.
Okay. So great. So just in terms of the small, what this is you have the months around the circle over here. And here it says environment and frost danger, average temperature, high and low, moon phase, and precipitation. So that's this legend over here. And then on the right, it says sow and harvest.
And we do have some answers to the question. Oh, sorry, go
Great.
ahead.
Yeah, no, go ahead. I want to hear what the answers are.
We have agricultural cycles. Is it the timing of harvest? Mapped against weather cycles is another one. And then someone mentioned that there were quite a few different things on one chart.
Yeah, great. Well, I think we have pretty much almost perfect answer in that. So this graph represents the potato's life cycle, and it depicts a comprehensive timeline for planning, planting, and monitoring potato crop. So actually really, really good interpretation to whomever came up with that. So thanks. And I do agree that there is a lot of information contained in one graph. And I think that it is acceptable to have a lot of information in one graph as long as there's the proper narrative yet again to accompany it, to explain what it means and why. So what I wanted to do here is just talk a little bit about the different types of graphs. And so the one that we just saw would be considered one of those complex graphs, which I think are really helpful to explore data. So it's good for aggregating data. So like you said, there was a lot of information presented in one visual. It helps to see all of the information in one place and dig into it. It's particularly effective, I think, if the data can be interactive. And later on, I'm going to be showing you, I want to show you a little bit of, introduce you maybe to a data platform that I've used that allows to bring the data to life. And I'll introduce you to Flourish in just a little minute. But the other thing that I want to say is, and I've really struggled with this, but I do think ultimately classic charts tend to be better at explaining data. I've often tried to experiment with graphs that were visually more exciting and stimulating, but ultimately I think that people mostly relate to bar charts and line graphs and pie charts. Now, I do think you can beautify those, but it's important to keep in mind that those are the ones that people can most readily identify with. And if the goal is to have them quickly interpret the information that you present, I tend to rely heavily on the last three graphs, although I still aspire to present the data in more visually appealing ways. So anyway, that's just a little bit about the content, and what I'm hoping to do next is to shift gears a little bit and tell you about some of the experiments that I've made during my time at Kaiser, and open it up to some questions. So this is a software that if you are not familiar with it, I would really love for you to explore it. It's called Flourish. It is free, and it helps you visualize the data in a very simple fashion. So let me just give you a bit of a tour of something that I had to put together. So I was involved in the analysis of a nationally representative survey assessing Kaiser Permanente members' social needs. And I was working with the scientific team, but at the same time, I had to help bring the data to life and have it be more relatable to the ops team. So the folks really who didn't have a research science background, but who wanted to understand the data and play with the data without having to deal with the stats, the methods piece of it. So I did some digging, and this is one of the platforms, and I really encourage you to explore it. So this was somebody's coming. Anyway, so this was something fun. You can create these interactive PowerPoints. So this is, I don't remember the talking points that went with this, but it was, the idea was you can have a quick snapshot without like looking at the data set in the background, and you can add comments, etc. So this is, if you pay for subscription, then the data that you upload to this can be private or be in private mode. If you do not pay, then the data is public. So just anyway, something to keep in mind. But this is a link that you can send to folks and they can play with the data on their own. So for example, here, if I want to look at race, ethnicity, compare by region. So Kaiser is broken up into 8 regions, for example. Sorry, that's the end of the region here. Anyway, it just allows you at a glance to understand the demographic makeup of each of the Kaiser Permanente regions. And the nice thing about this platform is, I'll show you later, but it's clickable. So anyway, this is, again, not for the scientist. This is more, how do you bring the data set to the audience in a way that they can interact with in a more personal fashion. All right, so I just wanted to show you a little bit about I don't need to go, okay. So, yeah, I just want to show you some of the functionalities of this. So for example, if I just want to look at 5 social needs, or anyway, you have the option to click and customize. You can also do these animated graphs where you show that, where you see the change over time. You also have the opportunity to upload data at the zip code level, I believe, and create maps, which I didn't do for the purpose of this. Anyway, there's some animated functions, etc. So it's a tool that I think is worth exploring potentially if you want to simply present the data to your audiences. So anyway, that's that. And if there are any questions about this, please just let me know. I was also trying to explore and see what would work best. All right, this is another tool that I found incredibly useful in presenting the data. This is Adobe Spark. It's also another tool that is free. Where's my mouse? Oops, sorry. Sorry, my mouse froze for a second. It's free. So what we're looking at over here is really a data story that I put together. So part of my role at Kaiser was to create the equivalent of the annual report for the community health department. And on the back end, there was a lot of data collection, and they wanted me to compile it into something that was engaging for folks. So Adobe Spark is another tool that I would encourage you to look into, and it allows you to really very simply create these web pages where you can present your data. You can embed images of your graphs if you choose to. You can hyperlink. You can just send it sends you to other resources, etc. So it allows you to customize the layout to a certain extent. It's and again, I want to emphasize that it's really, really easy to use. So as you think about opportunities to present your data in a way that can be shared more readily with whomever is interested in the data, I think that there's Adobe Spark is a tool that you should all explore. The one thing I want to say about this is that unfortunately these web pages cannot be saved as PowerPoints. That's the one thing I wish we were able to do. I wish we could download this as a PowerPoint, as a PDF, but that's not yet an option. So that's the Adobe Spark work. I don't know if we have any questions about that. So I'm not seeing any questions. All right.
Oh, Maya, this is Paul.
Yeah.
Quick question. How long does it usually take for you to kind of learn how to use these, different platforms for the first time?
Not too long. These are really simple platforms. I think just a couple YouTube videos, a little bit of time to futz around with the platform. Again, what I showed you with the Flourish, really that was my first and only time using the platform, but there's so much more potential than what I'm presenting to you. I just wanted to introduce a couple free tools so that you could start packaging the data differently, but very, very user-friendly, both of these. So definitely worth exploring. And the first time I heard about Adobe Spark was at a conference, and I've used that quite extensively. And it's both of these tools that I'm presenting received a lot of positive feedback from the users because it's visually appealing and they're both interactive. You can both link to external resources, and it's a good way to put the data all in one place. So these are my two favorite free tools.
Got it. Thanks.
Yeah, I don't know if I have any other questions about this. So I just want to share something that's important to me in coming up with a presentation. This is very personal, and this is not something that might speak to everybody, but as part of my work at Kaiser, I was in charge with leading a rapid evidence review on the topic of digital equity. And I'm sure a bunch of you on the call have done lit reviews, and it's not the most fun or engaging of all activities. I'm sure you can relate. And I had to present this literature review to a number of fairly high position stakeholders. And I wanted to figure out a way to do it in a way that was engaging, I guess, for them, but also funner for me. So I developed this whole metaphor in the presentation where I framed it as how Iceland can inspire KP's digital equity strategy development. And the reason for doing that is that Iceland is really way ahead of the curve compared to the US when we think about digital equity. And I developed a whole series of metaphors that related to Iceland. Just again, the data, I think sometimes we present data in a way that's dry, but if you really wanted to make an impact and shape decisions, I personally think that it needs to be brought to life. So here's what I did, and I know that the font is small. If there's any interest, I can pull it up. But for getting clear on definitions, I had a blurry window, an overabundance of information. What I did over here is present the waterfall, but this was really the presentation of how I narrowed down 5,000 articles into my 88 or so that I included in the review. The lava was the hot topics in the field of digital equity. The Reykjavik Church was rising above digital illiteracy. This was about a balanced understanding of digital equity. This was my favorite, and I know that the image is small over here, but it's trimming the evidence, trimming the data evidence on digital health intervention. So the data being shared as a metaphor for a summary of the dozens of articles that I read and synthesized. And then this was the gap in the literature and illuminating the path forward. And I just want to say, again, this is my experimentation in how to bring the data to life to make it more meaningful and memorable for the audience. And I do want to say that this was a successful experiment and that folks remember this. I did include buying sheeps as part of trimming the data. That was probably a little overkill, but I had a little bit of fun with that. And so as you think about how to package the data that you work with, I would encourage you to think a little bit outside of the box in terms of presenting it in a way that makes it come to life a little bit. And then the other thing that I did, the other thing that's important to me, and I can show you other examples that are not in this presentation if there's interest, is humor to me is also very important. And I wish I had more time to work on this presentation, and maybe I would have if my kid didn't have 7 positive COVID cases in her class today, and my day got a little crazy. But anyway, so just in terms of bringing an element of humor, this was a presentation that I made to synthesize the rapid evidence review to a bunch of senior vice presidents at Kaiser. And I have to say that I was a little bit anxious, or not anxious, but this was maybe a little bit daring in terms of how to repackage it. So you'll see that I reused the logo from the front page to synthesize the review. But what I'm realizing is that this again proved to be impactful because people are tired of presentations. I think that there's so much information out there, and that anything that we can do to liven up the presentations and bring it to life is helpful. So this was so this is just the front cover of my deck, but it proved to be memorable, and I got a lot of positive feedback, although I really wasn't quite sure how it would be received. And I didn't put an element, I didn't add it into the presentation today, but I gave a presentation to over 300 people again at Kaiser on evaluation and research, and I illustrated all of my, I can pull it up if there's any interest later, but I made illustrations of all of the slides. And at the same time, I think, again, when I said earlier on that it's all about narrative plus data and visuals, I think it all goes hand in hand, but you need the content, right? So the literature review, there was real meat into the presentation. It wasn't just a silly metaphor about Iceland. And I think that it's important to keep in mind that it needs to go hand in hand with the content so that it's received in a way that's authoritative, that it has some power to it. And again, with this literature. So anyway, back to the drawing the illustrations. I wanted to reinforce the message for this, the presentation that I gave about evaluation. I just wanted to make it clear that evaluation, it's not only the role of evaluators to be doing evaluation, and that my message for the team was that the 300 people on the call should also feel ownership. So I wrote a poem to conclude the presentation about the role of evaluation, and sorry, I should have thought of putting it in here, but why I thought it was important for everybody to have a stake in evaluation. And again, I think it left a meaningful impact. And again, it was accompanied with narrative and visuals and numbers. So anyway, those are just a couple elements. Sorry, I ran over the first few slides, and I wish I had. I wish I know that the time is. We have some time for questions, but these are just some of the things that I've put together just to synthesize some key elements of data visualization. But what I was hoping to do is just take some time to stop sharing my screen and answer any questions that you may have today, now that I can actually see the screen in the chat. Oh, so hard to read. I'm sorry, I'm just seeing some of that. Okay. All right. I don't know if we have any questions, but I'd be happy to answer them if we did.
We did have a question pertaining to how to make the illustrations.
Okay. How do I make the illustrations? What illustrations are we talking? The ones that I was talking about. For the last presentation, I drew them, and I can look at my presentation. But so another tool that I find useful, and this costs a little bit of money, but if you're going to be packaging the data, I really like using a software called Slide Model. I think it's about $100 a year. And what you do is, if you make a lot of presentations in your work, this software allows you to download templates for PowerPoint, but it's really worth it. And I know that in my line of work, I end up using it a lot. So Slide Model, I can type it, and that's not the only one, but if you're doing a lot of graphs, I really like that one. So that's one of the ways that I do the graphs. Oh, somebody's coming in. Any other questions?
We had a hand raise. If you still have a question, feel free to come off mute and ask.
Okay, great.
Yes, thank you so much, Maya. I think I am in this situation now of trying to I know the statistics behind data, but I'm kind of in my personal situation, I guess. I was just thinking in terms of data trimming. I would like to get more some insights on that one, just because of sometimes we have this huge data sets and it's there's a lot of things that's going on and probably a lot of insights. How would you identify specific insights that should that would be I guess be marketable or be I guess be appropriate for the stakeholders?
Yeah, no, and I think that that's a great question, and I think I think talking to the stakeholders and asking them, but just being clear, and this was one of the earlier slides, and I probably didn't spend enough time talking about it, but I think just making sure that you have a clear understanding of the goals of the data and what story you want that, what decisions you want that to impact, so that you can then start cutting pieces of the data set and tailoring the results to the story that you want to tell. We have access to so much data, and it's really sometimes overwhelming. And I think it's the job, the data analysts have a critical job, but I think that there's power that can be had in pairing the hard skills with the soft skills in terms of the combining the data and the art and the science. So the science is being able to crunch the data, the art piece is being able to use it to tell a story and being able to focus it. And it's really hard to synthesize the data. I think for me, it's important to understand that it's okay not to present all of the data that we have. We have a tendency to want to showcase everything that we've done, all of the analyses that we've run. And for me, it's important to be able to prioritize, but also recognize that you can't present everything. And it's actually less is more. I think that's my motto. And sometimes it's better to have less information and make sure that you guide the audience to the information that is critical to them and that helps them answer the question they're posing in the first place. So setting clear objectives about what you're trying to accomplish with the data is, and writing it down. I think that documenting it just to make sure you have a clear path is very helpful to me, at least.
Thank you for that one, Maya.
Monica, if you wanted to ask your question.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I was wondering if there's any particular guide that you recommend for making data graphics accessible to visually impaired readers, like how to write for screen readers, as well as the different, somebody else mentioned in the chat, colorblind viewers. And that's also another element of accessibility, I guess. So is there a guide that you recommend?
Unfortunately, that's not something that I'm aware of. It's not, no, I don't know of a guide right now. I think that I've focused more on the literacy piece. So how do you create visuals for a low literacy group? But I don't know. I think that that's an excellent question. I'm happy to look into it, but sorry, I don't have any more insight about that. But
That's okay.
It's a great point. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Maya, excuse me, have you ever used Tableau? I know that we've used that within
Yeah.
Hopkins. Do you find that to be a good one to use as well?
Yeah, yes, I actually have been trying to get my guys to get me a Tableau account for a little while. I haven't yet succeeded. That's not something that I've used it a little bit. I think it's one of the most commonly used data visualization tools. It's not one that I commonly use, but yes, it's a very powerful tool to synthesize information, to generate maps, also to create these storybooks. So yeah, absolutely. I think that that's something during my time at Hopkins that I wish I had spent more time exploring, that and the GIS mapping. So I think that if you have opportunities to take a course on mapping and the GIS stuff, I think that's something I would do. I would also, I don't know what you have at Hopkins these days about Tableau, but if there's an opportunity to take a class or a certificate or something, I think that it's a very marketable skill that I would definitely invest in. No, it's one of the key tools, softwares. Let me know if we have any other questions. And sorry, I'm just seeing now some of the comments about not the size of the font. Sorry about not being able to see it. My eyes hurt. I apologize. Yeah, I wish I had a big screen, but in this remote environment, you work with what you have at your disposal. Any other questions?
If we have no other questions, Maya, did you have any final thoughts to leave everyone with?
Just in terms of my exploration of data for storytelling, data visualization, it's not something that I studied. It's something that I feel is an important skill to have once you exit academia, and if you enter a corporation or a not-for-profit, it's a very valuable skill to be able to act as the bridge between research and the ops. So those actually doing the work and those who are researching. So I think it's a critical skill that I would invest in. That you have tons of resources, materials to learn how to visualize data and use it to communicate information out there. I think that it's something worth investing in as you all prepare for your next move beyond Hopkins. And it's positioned me well to communicate, to really serve as the intermediary between a number of different teams working at Kaiser Permanente. And I also enjoy it because of the aesthetics. I like the aesthetics and the colors and the graphic element of it. So, and it's an interesting field because it combines the data, the research, the graphic design, but also the communication. And it's something that I would consider investing in terms of professional development while you have the opportunity to. So.
Thank you for that, and thank you for taking the time to present.
Thank you.
I definitely think that there's been a lot to learn here about data in itself, but also how you can utilize it. I will make sure to include Maya's slides for today so that you all have this information as a resource. So please be looking out for that email. So this concludes our day on transferable skills. We will resume tomorrow with a focus on interviewing. So if you are interested, please do utilize the link that we have been sharing to sign up for those sessions. You all have a good evening. Thank you for your participation, and thank you again, Maya, for presenting.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, Maya.
Thank you.